This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, across emerging market assets today, gains were pretty much capped as concerns over rising virus cases in Asia and, of course, disappointing Chinese data hit sentiment. South Africa's JSE strengthened, but the momentum from Friday's rally slipped today, with financials down about 0.5%. Now, of course, all eyes were on the crypto market today as Bitcoin dropped to its lowest levels since February. Traders say intense selling pressure is in play, and that has weighed heavily on the value of many crypto assets, including Ethereum. Sell-offs intensified with Elon Musk's most recent tweets implying that Tesla might diversify its Bitcoin holdings. Of course, Bitcoin's market value was down by around 10% on the day. Now, also coming up on today's show, Sudan to get a $1.5 billion bridge loan from France to pay off its arrears with the IMF. Business owners in Uganda worried that the country's reduced budget will impact them negatively. And we look at why farmers in Kenya need to start looking more favorable at the snails on their farms. Now, France will provide Sudan with a $1.5 billion bridge loan to pay off its arrears with the International Monetary Fund. The move is expected to pave the way for wider debt relief of at least $50 billion that, of course, Sudan is seeking. Now, French President Emmanuel Macron is hosting the conference, which was attended by Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, the World Bank and IMF representatives as well. The aim is to draw investments in the energy, infrastructure, agriculture and telecom sectors. Saudi Arabia, which is Sudan's third largest creditor with about $4.6 billion, is pressing Sudan's other creditors to reach a broad agreement and reduce the country's debt pile. Now, Sudan is eligible for debt relief under the IMF and World Bank's Highly Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. Well, let's now find out the outcome of today's meeting. We're now joined by Ross Cullen. He's in Paris. Now, of course, Ross, a press conference has just concluded. What did everybody say? What was the tone? Was there any other progress made? Give us a sense of the general response you've heard to the idea of debt relief for Sudan.
Well, Uche, that news conference ending just about 15 minutes ago, it was much delayed, hosted by Emmanuel Macron with the Sudanese president of the Transitional Council and also the Sudanese Prime Minister in attendance. The men speaking Arabic, French and English, a range of languages, and answering a range of questions from journalists. But Emmanuel Macron started off by hailing Sudan as a success story, welcoming Sudan back into the international community. He said, "You've had 30 years of isolation and suffering. You can be a model for other countries. We will be accompanying you on your journey." And that's interesting what he said about being a model for other nations in the region and in the world. Emmanuel Macron name-checking Chad and Ethiopia as countries that could do worse than paying attention to what's going on in Sudan at the moment with the transition towards democracy. We also heard from the president of the Transitional Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and he was saying that we are ready in Sudan to open up. We are ready for investment. We are ready to cooperate. We are ready to take hard decisions. And also from the Prime Minister, Abdallah Hamdok, he was saying that today's summit, Uche, was a milestone, a watershed moment for focusing on Sudan and its transition to democracy, and also focusing on those investment opportunities in the country.
Now, of course, as you mentioned, Ross, today's conference was not just about debt relief. It was also meant to help spur interest in investing in Sudan's key sectors, projects in Sudan's key sectors, such as energy, mining, infrastructure. Give us a sense of how much interest you've seen there today. Any major deals in the works?
Well, it is important to mention, as you did earlier in the introduction, Uche, that $1.5 billion loan from France, the United Kingdom, the United States, already agreeing deals with Sudan for bridging loans. So France is now taking part in that as well. It's the second biggest creditor to Sudan behind Kuwait. So there was always going to be a major focus on debt relief, debt restructuring. That was mentioned by Emmanuel Macron in that news conference just 20 minutes ago, saying that we did reach that deal on debt reduction. That was a major topic of conversation for us, but also focusing on the private sector as well and broadening out to other industries. The Sudanese leaders saying that we are ready for serious investment when it comes to infrastructure, telecommunications, energy and agriculture. We want to be considered as a serious place to invest. But it wasn't just politics and economics that was taking up some of the discussions today. Uche, we heard from activists who took part in that popular uprising in 2019. Feminist activists, climate change activists also taking to the stage this afternoon during the open session of discussion and calling for equal opportunities for women and men in the new Sudan, growing a focus on media freedom as well. And we heard from UNESCO based in Paris as well, saying that there is a reinforcement of media freedom in the Sudanese transitional process, increased rule of law, increased investment, improved healthcare. All these things were major topics for discussion, showing that the new Sudan, they really want to ensure that it is a democratic country and has a transition that is not only a political and economic one, but also a transition, Uche, that is environmental. They want to see the new Sudan as a climate-friendly country.
Well, many thanks for that update, Ross. I'm sure you're standing by with more coming out of that conference. That, of course, is Ross Cullen joining us there in Paris. Now, earlier, Egypt and Sudan signed a memorandum of understanding to establish a joint venture to promote bilateral trade and investment between the two. The announcement came ahead of the summit in France to, of course, rally support from the government. Here's Yasser Hakim with more.
The company, which is a joint venture between state-owned enterprises from both nations, will concentrate on promoting trade and investment in food products.
The partnership will be in agricultural products and livestock. Egypt and Sudan have been trading in livestock for 6 years, which has kept prices of meat stable in Egypt. This cooperation will increase trade. In the later stage, there will be trade and investments in other products like oils, fertilizers, detergents, and disinfectants.
Such partnerships are seen as a much-needed step to support Sudan as it rebuilds a damaged economy from decades of turmoil.
Today, we are trying to complement each other by using Egypt's expertise and Sudan's natural resources in these projects, and is the basic strategy which we are building on, one of mutual respect.
The Egyptian Sudan Company for Development, Trade and Investment is expected to boost bilateral trade between the North African neighbors.
Products exported by Egypt include plastic, pharmaceuticals, medical equipment, fertilizers, iron and steel. Sudan exports include grain, fruit oils, cotton, livestock and meat. Bilateral trade reached $860 million. Of these, $496 million are Egyptian exports and $360 million are Sudanese exports to Egypt. After the new company begins operations, we expect trade in the first year to exceed $1 billion.
Besides the formation of the Egyptian Sudan Company, Cairo has also signed deals with Khartoum to upgrade Sudan's infrastructure, roads, electricity, and various industries. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's head to Uganda now. Business owners there have expressed concern that they'll bear the brunt of the government's new budget. The country's parliament approved plans to cut down on government spending for the next financial year, but lawmakers warn that new sources of revenue will be needed to finance even the reduced expenditure plan. Here's CGTN's Michael Baleke with the details.
Sylvia Tiang runs a business making liquid detergent. She started out over a year ago when Uganda imposed lockdown restrictions to stop the spread of COVID-19. Sylvia is worried that many of the gains made during her first year of business could be lost as the government moves to impose new taxes in the next financial year. Sylvia says this could increase her costs of production and reduce her income.
We all know that once you touch fuel, you've literally touched the entire economy because one, we're a landlocked country and all our products come in by road, So we are seeing a rise in other prices as well, food prices, the materials that we use. Personally, I use a lot of plastics to package my liquid soap.
The idea is to mobilize domestic resources to finance the country's $13 billion budget. Uganda's finance minister says the country is sinking in debt.
Do you want me to start continuing borrowing and I mortgage the country? Or people must pay taxes? Taxes must be paid. And it's a noble task to pay taxes. It's not a punishment. Actually, you are investing in yourself. When you pay taxes, you are investing in your business.
Nearly 40% of the allocated budget will go towards debt-related payments. With the rest of the funds, the government says it plans to prioritize security, infrastructure development, industrialization, and wealth creation. The government of Uganda hopes the vaccine rollout will help economic activity return to normal. More than 400,000 people in Uganda have received their first COVID-19 jab. The budget has allocated close to $60 million to a new initiative called the parish model. It will allow households which grow crops for their own food to join commercial production.
For the first time in our budgeting history, communities are deciding how they want to spend their money. And the communities, it's not a homogeneous group; they are different. So for me, is that this parish model is one of the unique things in this budgeting system that is likely to bring money closer to communities and also address their problems.
Despite the pandemic, the Ugandan economy grew to about $38 billion in 2020, up from $35 billion the previous year. The government hopes to continue that trend, allowing entrepreneurs a chance to grow their businesses. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And let's now take a look at our corporate headlines today. AT&T, the owner of HBO and Warner Brothers Studios and streaming service Discovery, says they will combine their content assets to create a standalone global entertainment and media business. Discovery President and Chief Executive David Zaslav will lead the proposed new company whose name will be disclosed by next week. Now, the move follows AT&T's $108.7 billion acquisition of U.S. media conglomerate Time Warner in 2018 and certainly points to the fact that TV viewership is now moving to streaming. Meanwhile, Emirates could swap some of its orders for 126 Boeing 777X jets for smaller 787 Dreamliners, and that's all part of a sweeping review of its future fleet requirements. The airline CEO, Sheikh Ahmed bin Saeed Al Maktoum, said the company is currently in talks with a U.S. plane maker over its fleet planes. Meanwhile, Ryanair has reported a record annual after-tax loss of $989 million after COVID-19 restrictions forced it to scrap over 80% of its flights. However, the Irish airline says there were signs the recovery had begun. Europe's largest discount airline flew 27.5 million passengers in its financial year ending in March, and that's down from 149 million the previous year in what it calls the most challenging in its history. And Vantage Towers, the infrastructure unit of Britain's Vodafone, has reported modest growth in line with its own guidance in its first full-year results since floating on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Now, revenue grew by 2.2% to $1.2 billion in the year to March 31st. Vodafone span out Vantage last year, and the Towers unit, which was listed in March this year in Frankfurt, completed Germany's largest public listing since 2018. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's now take a short break, still coming up on the show. Tunisia in a new set of measures to relieve businesses affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And Nigeria looks to diaspora remittances as a formidable source of foreign currency.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now, the UK's Development Finance Institution, the CDC, recently announced a $1 billion target for investments across Africa for 2021. It is targeting sectors such as infrastructure and finance, and it is looking at countries like Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Egypt. Now, in Kenya, the group has over $326 million committed to supporting about 80 companies that provide over 27,000 jobs in the country. The CDC also plans to expand its Kenya portfolio over the next 2 years as one of the top priority markets. Well, let's now get a bit better picture of the CDC's plans on the continent. And of course, here in Kenya, we're now joined by Seema Danani. She's the head of office and coverage director for the CDC here in Kenya. Great to have you with us on the show, Seema. Now, of course, as we just mentioned, the CDC seems to be ramping up financing in Africa, especially at a time when we're seeing international lenders, investors, private equity funds sort of reducing their exposure to the continent. So, as we mentioned, you plan to invest over $1 billion this year alone. Summing up your investment activities in Africa so far, what is the CDC's specific focus or target on the continent?
Sure, and let me first say thank you so much for having me on today. To answer your question, I think that as a development finance institution, it's so important for us to be counter-cyclical and remain committed to our markets as investees and during this really difficult time. Our commitment this year, as you mentioned, is $1 billion for Africa, but it's not new. Over the last 3 years, we've actually invested just shy of $4 billion in Africa, more than half of our capital. And with respect to targets, I think we're really looking to support investees in clean energy, transportation infrastructure, food security, as well as the retailing of staple items and also industrials in the market.
Now, you certainly have huge plans here in Kenya. Just pointing to one, you partnered with Kenya's Equity Group on a $100 million funding facility to, of course, support small and medium enterprises during COVID-19. Give us a sense of how you plan to expand your Kenya portfolio going forward over the next 2 years, and in what specific areas are you looking at?
Sure, we're very keen to grow our presence in Kenya, although I must add again, Kenya is not a new market for us. We've been investing here for over 70 years, and today our portfolio supports, as you earlier mentioned, close to 30,000 jobs across the numerous sectors. But as a regional economic hub, Kenya is a priority market for CDC, and we're really proud to be able to contribute towards strengthening the private sector and supporting innovative, pioneering businesses that drive economic development. So in that vein, we'll continue our work on clean energy, although in Kenya we have very well-developed renewable sectors. So we'll focus on battery storage of power and ways in which we can support the transmission and distribution of power through one of our platform companies called Gridworks. Under food and agriculture, we'll like to focus on regenerative agriculture and reforestation through a forestry platform that we're looking at. In the manufacturing sector, we're looking out for low carbon technology assets and industries that are adopting circular economy practices. By that I mean sort of recycling practices. And we'll also continue our work to provide technical assistance through CDC Plus. CDC Plus has really been able to support quite a number of our investees, particularly in the healthcare space, especially during the early days of the pandemic. And more recently, they've launched the Africa Insights platform, which helped to solve the problem of not having access to reliable data on which private and public sector entities can depend on to make critical investment decisions.
Well, on that note, you're also targeting other key markets in Africa, as you sort of mentioned, Egypt, Ethiopia, Nigeria. Give us a sneak peek into some of those upcoming projects.
Yeah, so we're very excited to expand our reach across the continent and very, very, very keen. The focus areas I've mentioned won't change across those geographies, but I think what will be key is really looking at a couple of themes. So the first is really around climate finance. We're very keen to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and invest in projects that will assist in our transition to net zero emissions by 2050. We want to support projects that ensure what we call a just transition towards climate change. And by this, I mean we want to ensure communities are equipped with the right skills to work and operate new technologies. And all of these will be in line to ensure that 30% of annual commitments that we make this year will go towards climate finance. Another theme for us that you'll see across our markets will be of that of gender lens investing. So we have existing partnerships with the likes of the Boardroom Africa, who assist experienced African women to get into the boardroom. We also established and actually co-founded the 2X Challenge with partner DFIs, where we've encouraged investments into projects that empower women as entrepreneurs, that empower women as employees, as well as women as the consumer of products and services. And to date, we've mobilized $4.5 billion in that space. And I'm sure you'll see more of those types of investments from us as overarching themes going forward.
Well, very quickly, I just want to hone in on the agriculture sector, because we know the CDC is part of some major projects in Africa's agricultural sector. It's a key time because a food crisis looms on the continent. We're also seeing the frequency and severity of climate change sort of increasing on the continent. So how's the CDC putting their hat into that sector?
So we've been working actively in this space, recognizing the issues around food security for quite some time now. We've recently announced a $100 million debt investment in the agricultural conglomerate ETG. Our funding with ETG will help to strengthen food value chains by expanding logistical networks. And the investment actually helps to support over 500,000 farmers across 29 countries across the continent. And this is really about helping them to connect them to global markets and enabling their financial independence. In the same area, we've recently supported the Fatiza Food Fund 2, which targets over 90,000 smallholder farmers and micro entrepreneurs, creating over 2,000 jobs and sustaining another 10,000. So the focus of the fund will be on increasing agricultural output by promoting smarter methods to enhance crop resilience, decrease wastage, and of course, thereby increasing yields and incomes for the farmers. But it's not just in the food sector that we've been able to make some big announcements recently. Another critical sector to all of our economies right now is in pharmaceuticals, and we recently announced the Zanzibar Pharmaceuticals project, where we've entered into a consortium that will provide $250 million to establish a manufacturing facility that will improve the availability and affordability of generic pharmaceuticals across the continent. So these are some really big projects in very critical sectors, and we're really excited to see those come to fruition this year.
Well, we're certainly watching. Thank you so much for joining us, Seema, on the show today. That, of course, is Seema Danani. She's the head of office and coverage director for the CDC here in Kenya. Well, let's move on now to Tunisia. The country has announced a new set of measures for people and businesses which were affected by the COVID-19 crisis and the general lockdown, which, of course, paralyzed its economy. Now, authorities are hoping that the new measures, which include financial aid to SMEs, will cushion businesses from the devastating impact of the pandemic. From Tunis, here's CGTN's Anin Shaushi with the details.
The North African state's government said it will support the economic sectors most affected by the recent COVID-19 measures through direct financial assistance. These activities will be identified by the Minister of Social Affairs and the Minister of Economy and Finance.
We're going through a very difficult period. The health situation is very dangerous. It has made life difficult. The government was forced to shut down the country to save lives and stem the spread of the virus, which killed thousands of Tunisians. These measures have an economic and social cost.
Authorities will also earmark 5,000 interest-free loans worth around $1,800 each. Merchants will benefit from the loans with advantageous repayment conditions, in addition to a one-year grace period.
I know that these measures are not enough, yet we also know the reality of the pressure on public finances and the state budget will accompany the people and businesses during the deep economic crisis.
The Confederation of Industry, Trade and Handicrafts and the Tunisian Confederation of Citizen Enterprises have criticized the government's decision to shut down the economy from May 9th to 16th. The sudden measures have deepened the country's economic and social crisis.
As representatives of thousands of businesses, we are no longer looking for direct financial aid or compensation from the state because this will never happen. The government needs to postpone bill payments, taxes and social contributions. Otherwise, we could win the war on the coronavirus but destroy the economy.
The Finance Ministry and the Social Department will postpone the employers' contributions for the second quarter of 2021. Authorities will also postpone the payment of the flat tax until the end of 2021 without penalty for small merchants and craftspeople registered in the flat rate tax system. Union leaders have called on the government to provide unemployment insurance for thousands of workers impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Tunisia's COVID-19 aid and relief program could include workers who are not ordinarily eligible for unemployment benefits. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, diaspora remittances to Nigeria dropped 27.7% to $16.8 billion in 2020, and that's according to the World Bank. Now, despite the drop, the country is turning to these inflows to shore up its reserves and to stabilize its exchange rate. The country's central bank has introduced a raft of measures to encourage more remittances. Here's CGTN's Deji Batmus with more on that story.
Nigeria has been battling a severe forex shortage for close to 2 years now. With a reduction in oil earnings as a result of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, forex supply to the economy has been badly affected, forcing the central bank to carry out a series of devaluations to stabilize the exchange rate. The Apex Bank is now beginning to give diaspora remittances serious attention as a source of forex supply.
Before now, what we've seen is that we've only given a lot of I'll use the word prioritization to price of crude. When price goes up, we jubilate. When it comes down, we worry. And then two, we have constantly been looking at, anytime there's need for money, we look at what is direction of foreign direct investments and the rest of them. Whereas we pay less attention to diaspora remittances as well as export sector support.
The World Bank puts diaspora remittances to Nigeria last year at $16.8 billion. Some other estimates put it at $21 billion. Recently, the Central Bank of Nigeria introduced a number of measures to boost inflow of remittances. Recipients are now allowed to receive funds in foreign currencies and even get a 5 naira rebate on every dollar sent by Nigerians in the diaspora in what the CBN calls the Naira for Dollar scheme.
So it's facilitated and enabled the rise of foreign currency inflows into the Nigerian economy. Also, let's not forget, in as much as that policy made a lot of sense, it is still not a fundamentally intelligent macroeconomic policy or monetary policy in a sense. And I'm saying this because that policy came right after the crypto ban.
The CBN says the policy is only a temporary measure to quickly harness the potentials of diaspora remittances and address Nigeria's chronic forex shortage. And thanks in part to the policy, diaspora remittances are projected to grow to about $22 billion by the end of this year.
We have also not created a structure around understanding the diaspora remittances market particularly, all right? And until we can also unlock potentials in that regard, I do not think one policy would effectively unlock it. It only increases inflow, and there is more than just inflow. There has to be a strategy to diaspora remittances. There has to be a broader economic plan or a broader economic strategy or institutional strategy on how we can use diaspora remittances better, all right, especially for infrastructural and capital expenditure and enabling economic growth and development than just into direct people's pocket.
Diaspora remittances have been a lifesaver for many Nigerians, and for a long time, the government simply ignored its potential as an important source of foreign exchange supply. But it is now taking it very seriously. So what the central bank does next to further harness its potential remains to be seen. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
You're watching Global Business Africa. We're going to take a short break now, but still coming up on the show. China supports the appeal by developing nations for the waiver of intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines. And the European Commission agrees to a partial truce with the United States over metal tariffs imposed by former President Donald Trump.
It's taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
And in other headlines this hour, 14 people have been killed and 7 others wounded in 2 separate attacks by suspected Miseria armed militias in Abyei. The oil-rich Abyei region is one of the areas claimed by both South Sudan and Sudan. The region has seen frequent clashes between people from the Dinka ethnic group and the Arab Miseria militia. And the trial of former South African President Jacob Zuma has been postponed to next week. That's because Zuma lacked formal legal representation after his team withdrew on the 21st of April. Now, the much-anticipated trial is bringing to head close to 2 decades of investigations into South Africa's multi-billion-dollar arms deal. And still in South Africa, the much-anticipated second phase of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout got underway on Monday as a third wave sets in. The expanded drive will focus on remaining healthcare workers, older adults, and vulnerable groups. And finally, Egypt has opened the Rafah border crossing a day earlier than planned. It's to allow passage from Gaza for students, people needing medical treatment, and other humanitarian cases. Now, the border is the main exit point for the majority of Gaza's population. More than 200 people are said to have already crossed into Egypt. Even before Sunday's reopening, Egypt had been picking up people wounded in Israeli bombardments at the crossing. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now to some international news. China says it supports the appeal by developing nations for intellectual property rights to be waived for COVID-19 vaccines. Now, the country is working with the World Health Organization on its global vaccination program.
As world's largest developing country and a responsible member of the international community, China will do anything that helps developing countries counter the pandemic. China will support any actions that help developing countries to fairly obtain vaccines. This reflects the fact that COVID-19 vaccines are a global public good, and it also shows our will to build a community of health for all humanity. So China completely understands and supports developing nations' appeal for vaccine intellectual property rights to be waived.
Now, China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian said China had provided COVID-19 vaccines to more than 80 nations and 3 international organizations. He also said China had transferred technology for mass production to over 10 developing countries. Last week, the WHO approved the Sinopharm vaccine for emergency use. Beijing has also offered to help vaccinate UN peacekeeping troops and the International Olympics Committee. Meanwhile, the European Commission has agreed to a partial truce with the United States in a dispute over metal tariffs imposed by former President Donald Trump. Now, the European executive, which oversees EU trade policy, says it will suspend a planned hike of retaliatory tariffs for up to 6 months. These will have added U.S. products from lipstick to sports shoes and double to 50% duties on U.S. bourbon whiskey, its motorbikes and motorboats on June 1st. The announcement comes a month ahead of a visit to Brussels by U.S. President Joe Biden.
The EU intends to temporarily suspend the application of the second tranche of its rebalancing measures foreseen to enter into force on the 1st of June 2021. The EU and US will engage in discussions expeditiously to find solutions on these issues before the end of the year. The EU can grant a suspension for a maximum period of 6 months. We will discuss now with the member states to adopt the decision, and it will be entering into force immediately through an implementing regulation. Then, through this decision, we create space to negotiate with the US. So our intention now is to engage with the US to find permanent solutions to the problems of overcapacity, and then this would lead to the suspension of the remaining tariffs that were put in place already in 2018.
And moving on, much of the United Kingdom is reopening on Monday, with restaurants and bars now once again allowed to serve customers inside. More than 55 million people have received at least 1 dose of the vaccine. But of course, there's still concerns over more contagious variants spreading in the country. Here's more on that.
Confidence is returning, and so are the customers. This cheese market is reopening for the first time since the UK's 3rd lockdown 6 months ago. For nearby cafes and restaurants, income will increase as soon as they serve customers indoors.
It's 6 months of struggle, and we finally are able to serve customers inside, maximising the space, allocating good, safe area. We've got 2 floors to fill. I can't wait to fill them.
In many ways, with so many people now vaccinated in the UK, people are socialising again and in greater numbers, not just in cafes and restaurants, but also in shopping areas and markets. But it's been a tough year. A tenth of restaurants won't be reopening, according to one survey, which says thousands of establishments across Britain have closed with almost 10% fewer restaurants in operation than before the pandemic began. Those still open have had to adapt and often borrow to keep their businesses viable.
People have borrowed a lot of money. That debt needs to be serviced. So as we're moving forward, landlords are going to want rent that they've, there's a lot of things going to happen in the next 6 months to a year. And I think that's probably the most challenging time for businesses.
The UK government is keen to remove most COVID restrictions in 5 weeks' time, but it's been criticised for not responding sooner to the variant first found in India, which is spreading in parts of the UK. Ministers could find it difficult to reintroduce social distancing rules, with expectations rising that the UK is safe against COVID.
New variants are one of the biggest risks to this opening. Because of the speed of transmission of this one, it can really spread like wildfire amongst the unvaccinated groups. Hence, we need to get as many people vaccinated as possible.
For most of the past year, city centres have been quiet. Suburbs have fared better, with local, loyal clientele. But other costs will feature as soon as government help for businesses is phased out.
We are still possibly looking at starting to pay business rates from June onwards, maybe at a reduced rate. Furlough coming to an end at the end of the summer. So whatever savings we've had financially over the last years were depleted. So having to stand on your own from end of June onwards or July onwards, it is a scary thing.
May 17 is a big step for tens of thousands of businesses, hoping the virus will recede so their profits can return. Yolo David, CGTN, London.
And it isn't just the UK that's slowly reopening. In Italy, some beaches are eyeing the upcoming summer season, a key time for tourism in the country. Here's CGTN's Hermione Kitson explaining.
Palm by palm, the Italian summer is taking shape to provide a much-needed dose of vitamin C.
There is a desire to return to the sea, to stay in the open air and to socialize after all these months of lockdown.
Across Italy, beach clubs have opened their doors to another COVID-safe season. But for many business owners along the Adriatic coast, it was an uncertain wait.
It was terrible, at a psychological level especially, so now we hope the worst has passed and we can return to normal life.
For siblings Germana and Mauro Cioffi, the beach club is their livelihood.
We are a family. My parents and my brother work here, and we must work to live. The entire tourism sector is crucial.
Preparations have been months in the making.
Under the palms, no more than 8 people can stay together, and under the umbrellas, no more than 4 people, and the rows of palms must be at least 4 meters apart.
Finally, Italy's infection rate is starting to decline. Next week, all but one of the country's regions will be classified as low-risk yellow zones.
We have to stop talking about the virus and start to live again in serenity.
But it's not just local tourism that Italy hopes to lure back to its shores, with travellers from the EU and the UK no longer required to quarantine. From Sunday, a negative test on arrival is sufficient.
We are very happy for these new rules because we have many direct flights from UK and other European countries from Pescara.
La Bella Vita will return and we're ready to welcome you all.
Italy poised to reopen and restart, crucial steps in its path to recovery. Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Pescara.
Now, 80% of the world's goods by volume are carried by the shipping industry. And of course, India provides a large number of crew to man these ships. But the country's recent surge in COVID-19 infections has posed some challenges for the sector. Miralou explains.
240,000 or 14% of global seafarers come from India, making it one of the most significant suppliers of crewmen in the world. But the catastrophic surge in COVID-19 cases recently has prompted some ports to impose restrictions on crew and ships from the subcontinent. The major bunkering hub of Singapore, which usually sees over 20,000 crew changes a month, has banned seamen who have been in India in the past 14 days, with similar restrictions being placed in the UAE and China.
If
really, really onerous restrictions on Indian seafarers continues, it is going to make crew changes almost impossible and extremely difficult. And it's going to mean that many of these seafarers will be serving on board for much longer periods than they're contracted to do, with the result being very often a serious decline in mental health.
The health and safety of seafarers has been a cause for concern since last year, when over 400,000 of them were stranded for months due to port closures and travel restrictions. The UN, labor and industry associations, and companies like Maersk have since been calling on governments to recognize seafarers as essential workers and allow for crew change with set protocols in place.
The way we have been dealing with this challenge, not only in recent weeks, but over the last year, is that we have created a dedicated facility for all our Indian seafarers. So before they go abroad, travel out of India to join their vessel, they will go to this dedicated facility where they will be in de facto isolation. They will get tested and retested.
Maersk, which is the world's largest container shipping company, gets 30% of its crew from India. The company says it is in discussion with various authorities, including those in Singapore, on adjusting or modifying existing safety measures to manage Indian seafarers and emerging COVID variants.
We have been able to do crew change for our Indian seafarers in countries who have exemptions. But of course, if this ban also on seafarers goes from weeks into months, then it will be a challenge to us. So it's important that we find a solution in due time. Otherwise, it will cause a challenge to our industry.
Despite facing enormous challenges, the shipping industry surprised many as it witnessed a boom in the second half of last year. Industry experts warned that although the industry had been resilient and managed to deliver goods and essentials to the world, there is a risk that the global supply chain could be disrupted if more countries impose restrictions on Indian seafarers. Miro Lu, CGTN, Singapore.
And heading to Australia now, the country is experiencing a worker shortage, especially in sectors that rely on temporary and skilled migrants. The country has closed its borders to help stop the spread of coronavirus. But of course, that's highlighted just how much its economy relies on immigration. Here's CGTN's Greg Navarro with more.
Demand for veterinary services in Australia has risen sharply during the pandemic. That's due in part to the explosion of pet adoptions during that time. Meeting that demand inside the University of Sydney's veterinary teaching hospital has become increasingly challenging.
We've known we've had veterinary shortages previously, but this is the first time we've really seen significant nurse shortages, particularly in the specialty and emergency area.
That's because the once reliable flow of skilled veterinary nurses coming to Australia on temporary visas has dried up since the country closed its international borders last year to slow the spread of the virus. Australia prides itself on being a migration nation. It takes in more migrants than most countries and has come to rely on that steady flow of people.
The economic impact of immigration and at the moment the absence of that inflow has been very evident in the last 12 months in the Australian economy.
That's especially true for Australia's universities, which attract more international students than any other country. The billions of dollars they help to bring in each year before the pandemic was so important that many institutions have built their business models around that income. The agricultural industry relies heavily on people on holiday visas for seasonal work. So do the hospitality and tourism industries. And those sectors that have come to rely on skilled, temporary and permanent migrants are also feeling the impacts from closed international borders.
Well, the real consequences is just workload and staffing to be able to cope with the demand that's there.
The interesting thing is that other countries haven't closed their borders as tightly to the international flow of migrants, whether they be students or sort of temporary or permanent migrants. And that means that Australia is maybe losing a bit of competitive advantages.
Australia's government has suggested the country's international borders will likely remain closed until at least the middle of next year. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
Now, of course, Monday is World Telecommunication and Information Society Day. Representatives from China's telecom sector and research institutes gathered in Zhengzhou in central China's Henan province to discuss how to accelerate digital transformation. Well, Xia Rishui has more.
5G dominated the agenda of this year's World Telecom Day. China has made remarkable progress in the commercial use of 5G technology in the past 2 years. It has the world's largest 5G network, with over 280 million 5G mobile connections.
It's expected that 5G will bring 120 million yuan of investment in network infrastructure construction and a total of 800 million yuan in data usage in 2025. 5G will also directly lead to about 2.93 trillion yuan of economic added value.
China's main local telecom carriers, China Mobile, Unicom, and Telecom, have announced their new plans to promote 5G in the digital transformation of other industries. It's in line with China's 5G plus industrial internet strategy. So far, more than 1,100 5G plus industrial internet projects are under construction, covering 22 industries, including cement, automobiles, petrochemical, steel, mining, and oil fields. Other key players like China Tower and China Broadcasting Network Corporation, Huawei, and Datang are also speeding up 5G network construction.
具体来讲呢，我们呢主要做了几个方面的工作。第一个是基础能力的建设。
We've been working on integrating 5G with other industries for many years. First, we plan to build over 52,000 base stations in Henan province by the end of this year. Second, we aim to train talents who have the expertise in both 5G and other industries. Third is to build industrial internet platforms so that our network can help various industries.
Today, the digital economy is a key to the country's development. China has made huge progress in 5G construction, but experts say that more needs to be done to grab the opportunities to accelerate the development of the digital economy. Xia Ruixue, CGTN, Zhengzhou, Henan Province.
On that note, here's a quick look at commodity markets today. Momentum in a commodity market seems to be slipping this week after huge gains last week. Traders say we can expect record highs in copper prices and oil. Now, oil did edge higher today after a third weekly increase as a demand recovery in key regions raised optimism about rising fuel consumption, and that's despite a COVID-19 flare-up in parts of Asia. The main threat to a renewed rally is the latest series of lockdowns in Asia to curb, of course, spiking COVID-19 cases. Meanwhile, gold remaining pretty steady today. Let's take a short break now, still coming up. A Kenyan researcher gets on a drive to popularize snail farming.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Now, snail farming in Kenya has the potential to become a lucrative business. That's according to some researchers. The Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology has set up a research and training center to help farmers in the country get started. Snails have been shown to have health benefits when eaten and can also be used in cosmetic products, animal feed, and even fertilizer. One researcher is working on getting entrepreneurs in on it, as Wilkista Nyabwa now reports.
This wooden chest holds years' worth of work and effort. The snails are part of university lecturer Dr. Paul Kinoti's efforts to introduce Kenyan farmers to snail rearing. Dr. Kinoti is a lecturer at the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology's Department of Horticulture and Food Security. His interest in snails began when he was studying abroad.
When I was doing my postgraduate studies in Austria, I came into contact with farmers that were actually into snail farming. And this got my attention because the nature of the business was not so much involving. There was enormous production, and more importantly, there was more money into it.
The biosnail project he helped set up at the university has been running since 2019, but convincing farmers to give snails a try is a work in progress. In Kenya, many farmers dislike snails and see them as pests. Now a number are learning the potential of the creatures. In order to start rearing them, farmers must get special licenses as snails are considered wildlife. Then they can get snails and prepare for them to start laying eggs. These types of snails can lay about 300 eggs in a good season, and though their economic lifespans are short, lasting about 1.5 years, their benefits extend far beyond. The benefits of snails can be divided into 3 main groupings. The slime they secrete can be used to make cosmetics and skincare products. A liter of snail slime can fetch over $45. The shells can be used to make poultry feed and fertilizer. Snails which are herbivorous can also be eaten. There has been a growing interest in snails for the medicinal value they contain. Research has shown that snail meat is low in cholesterol and can help to manage health complications like high blood pressure and diabetes.
We know from snails they are very nutritious in terms of protein, in terms of vitamins, in terms of minerals like calcium, magnesium, and of course selenium and many others.
While snail rearing is common in parts of West Africa, it's still a novelty in Kenya. At the model farm, training has slowed down because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Researchers hope that when things return to normal, farmers will return to take snail rearing across the country. Wilkista Nyabwa, CGTN.
Well, before we leave you today, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand led losses among emerging market currencies today. It dropped about 0.5%. Now, traders say fears of a new wave of COVID-19 infections in Asia is dampening demand for emerging market currencies. In South Africa, traders say there's a lot of caution ahead of a local decision on interest rates, which is due on Thursday. And of course, consumer price growth figures before that. That has also kept the rand on the back foot today. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.